Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's NCVER webinar, Attracting Industry Experts to Become Vet Practitioners, a Journey, Not a Destination. I'm Michelle Cicelli. I'm part of our Research and Data Analytics branch here at NCVER, and I'm joined in our office today by, with our discussants, Ian Curry. Now, Ian is the National Coordinator for Skills, Training and Apprenticeships with the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, and Ian's also an NCVER board member. So a very warm welcome to you today, Ian.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Mark and Darryl's report later on. And as I've just mentioned, we're joined by our two presenters and the authors of this report, Dr. Mark Tyler and Dr. Darryl Dymock, both from Griffith University. So welcome to you both. Now, before we get started, I'll quickly run through some housekeeping for those who have joined us today. To the right of your screen, you should see the control panel where you can select audio mode and ask questions. And we do invite you to submit questions in writing using the questions panel at any time throughout the presentation. Now, for privacy reasons, only we can see your questions. We will acknowledge your questions either during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar or afterwards via email. I'll hand over to Mark and Darryl in just a moment to begin today's presentation, and then after which I'll call on Ian to provide his response to their work, and then we'll get on to the Q&A session after that. Okay, so over to you, Mark and Darryl.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm Mark Tyler. And I'm Darryl Dymock. Thanks for coming and joining us today to discuss the report, Attracting Industry Experts to Become Vet Practitioners. And as we said, definitely a journey, not a destination. So the problem that faced us is that there's a significant shortage of vet trainers and teachers and assessors in Australia. The problem seems to be widespread, affecting most industries and sectors. Why does the problem exist, and what might we do about it are the questions that we endeavour to try and answer.
Okay, so we did this research in three phases. In phase one, we had useful talks with the skilled service organisations to help us scope the problem, and they were vital in identifying potential RTOs to interview. And then in phase two, we caught up with those interviews, 27 RTOs that have been identified through those SSOs. They sometimes also facilitated the contacts for us, and we were very grateful for that. And these RTOs were from all 6 Australian states and the ACT. There were 14 private RTOs, 10 public RTOs, and 3 enterprise RTOs.
Now, the RTOs nominated 37 different areas known to them where teachers and trainer shortages exist. However, there was virtually unanimous agreement that there were continuing shortage of trainers and assessors across almost every industry. The RTOs identified what they thought the issues were in attracting industry experts into vet and possible solutions. Phase 3.
So in phase 3, we undertook a survey of vet practitioners, once again using the RTOs that we'd done the interviews with. These responses were online, anonymous, and sent directly to the university research database.
We had 333 responses, quite overwhelming. We weren't expecting this number of people, a number of responses to the actual survey. And they were telling us their recruitment from their journey in terms of their recruitment from industry, the transition into vet, and their ongoing experiences of vet teachers and trainers. The majority of respondents were 40 years or older. Almost 80% had 11 years or more experience in industry. Most had a combined trainer and assessor role.
And the overall message from all the participants was that becoming a vet practitioner is an ongoing process, not an end in itself, hence the title of our report. It's a journey, not a destination. And the passion that came through was just amazing from those practitioners.
Ideally, there was a dual professionalism that sets the vet practitioner role apart. enables them to continually interact with industry to meet changing workplace needs and advances. It typically began at some point within an earlier career and involves vocational education preparation, transition to vet, and a continuing practice and updating.
So we're going to use those three headings here to talk about recruitment, transition and updating. So recruitment, what they told us. First of all, that they told us there was the need for trainers was not always recognised even by those within the industry. People we sometimes spoke to said, oh, we didn't know there was a shortage. And some aspiring vet practitioners were unaware of the requirements to enter the field or how to go about making such a move. That was one of the other things we found. People just didn't know where to go, where to look. Generally, the vet could not match the wage that could be earned in industry. RTOs won't be surprised at that finding. Vet practitioners were strongly attracted by the notion of developing the next generation of workers in their industry.
RTOs generally still relied on traditional advertising approaches such as recruitment websites, but some were exploring the social media aspects of things and looking more at industry networks. The vet practitioners in private RTOs reported that findings I've lost my spot, excuse me.
Finding a position.
Yeah, vet practitioners in public RTOs, on the other hand, reported a wider variety of sources in terms of recruitment, 1/3 being recruited from the direct approach. Similarly with the private organisations, there was some direct approaching to RTOs and from RTOs.
Vet practitioners mainly considered that industry-related outlets were the most appropriate way to promote the notion of a second career, to encourage industry experts to become dual professionals. And there seemed to be value in trying to capture those experts at a certain point in their career, possibly around their 40s. And the use of incentives, we asked about whether they thought that incentives to encourage people to move across was conditionally supported, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
The mandatory requirement for vet practitioners to hold a Cert 4 in training and assessment prior to their employment tended to confound the recruitment process, as RTOs had to find dual professionals, and many potential vet practitioners seemed unaware of that requirement. Educationally, the Cert 4 TAE provided an insurmountable challenge to some, and conversely, represented almost an insult to highly trained and respected industry experts. They were pleased to present the reality of the vet practitioner role, to show the full range of responsibilities and expectations, rather than whitewashing it as some vet practitioners had received.
So the key points from recruitment was, in this recruitment stage, it's important to pay attention to those industry experts who display a passion for training and to ensure they know where and how to begin the journey. So pretty basic sorts of things you might think, but nevertheless, these are the things that need to be made clear. And as one respondent put it, when you decide to attract people, it's got to be seamless, an easy process, and you've got to show them what the end result is going to be. So once again, it's that journey, not a destination.
Okay, let's move on to transition. So it's transitioning into the role. And what did they tell us? Let me move the slide on. It's a bit slow. Okay. Casual and contracted employment options were possible deterrents for encouraging potential vet practitioners who were seeking full-time jobs. The Cert 4 TAE credential was considered by some RTO and vet practitioners as not fit for purpose, with too high an emphasis on processes and procedures in vet, not enough emphasis on teaching and learning. Some suggested that training package skill sets could be used more effectively as an acknowledged and sufficient requirement that will be sustainable for delivering competencies.
And the main challenges the responses identified for industry experts considering the transition was to be that they needed to be aware, firstly, that they needed a passion for teaching and be practically prepared for the task. that they were likely to encounter a range of student abilities and motivations. Somebody mentioned talking about being in industry, perhaps mentoring 1 or 2 people and ending up having to teach a class of 30, sometimes reluctant students. They needed to be aware of the demands of a heavy workload overall, including meeting administration and compliance requirements and working unpaid out of hours. These things that seem to sneak up on them that they weren't expecting.
And their input continued in terms of transition. So according to experienced vet practitioners surveyed, easing the transition from industry to vet came down to 3 main issues. First, proactive management and peer support and mentoring. Secondly, a more hands-on and extended experience over the Cert 4 TAE with supervised practice. And thirdly, careful introduction and reinforcement of the necessary administration to meet ASPA compliance requirements.
Interestingly, after we've heard all that about the Cert 4, that having been through the process, these experienced practitioners generally didn't regard the Cert 4 so much as a stumbling block, but as an imposed requirement which they just had to meet to move into vet. Just over half the respondents considered that Cert 4 helpful in developing and maintaining their role, but overwhelmingly this was related to understanding vet systems rather than about teaching and learning. And about a quarter of them said it had limited or no value for their educational practice.
So the key points to transition, it's clear that the transition from industry to vet is a vital stage of the journey because it's a point that the prospective practitioner encounters the reality of their new role. This is particularly true for those with little previous experiences as a trainer in their trade or industry. The nature and extent of the support they receive at this stage may therefore determine not only their effectiveness as vet practitioners in the first instance, but also whether or not they remain in vet.
Some vet practitioners, in terms of retaining and updating, if we're looking at staying in the system, some vet practitioners found the demands on them overwhelming and very different from their expectations. However, many were prepared to overlook these because of the satisfaction achieved from their teaching role. In some parts of vet, especially in private RTOs, the lack of a career pathway was a disincentive to remaining in the vet practitioner role.
I'm not so sure what's happening with the slides at the moment. They seem to have taken a bit of a turn. I'll just wait for them to catch up. We're talking about retaining and updating. If you could organise that, please, Stephen. I'll just continue.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. Okay. The continual upgrading of the TAE also imposed a burden on practitioners and RTOs, and reportedly resulted in some practitioners actually leaving vet. Further, there's a satisfying work-life balance and intentionally supportive culture, teaching satisfaction, and maintaining strong links with industry through professional development all appeared to help counter the pull of the highest salaries that was reported in industry.
Those coming direct from industry may also feel a different sort of pull, and that's the actual feeling of belonging to that previous workplace that they had there as part of a trade or professional community of practice.
Being prepared for what to expect before they take up their new post is part of the answer. But once in the new role, ongoing support is essential for vet practitioners. They're not going to feel alone and unsupported. They really felt they needed that extra support.
Now we've got some recommendations here, and we'll just identify a few of these because you'll see them in full in the report. But just to identify a few in recruitment, for example, one is to continually promote the concept of a vet practitioner and assist industry experts to realise that opportunities exist now or in their future careers. It doesn't have to be right at this point. And we thought that industry networks were identified, events, publications were identified as the likely best way of reaching people like that.
Further, we recommended that, highlighting the reasons why industry experts might consider, for example, giving back to industry, preparing the next generation, creating a different work-life balance, transfer of existing teaching and mentoring skills that they already hold, and the possibility of a salary negotiation. Giving industry experts a realistic picture of what it means to be a vet practitioner, including holding appropriate mandatory training qualifications and industry currency, which not all of them tended to know.
Then the other suggestion is to provide bite-sized supervised opportunities to enable aspiring vet practitioners to experience the role before committing themselves. There was quite a bit of support for this and various ways that you might do that. But also, some people told us how they went about identifying industry experts with that passion that we talked about and encouraged them, in fact, to apply for positions in vet.
So building robust relationships with RTOs, whereby industry experts can trial vet practitioner training role, work part-time in training while maintaining their industry role, or enabling a full transition into the vet practitioner role would be useful. So enable both vet practitioners and industry experts to access periods of secondment in each other's workplace was seen as a useful recommendation.
We sometimes call it, or in the research, it's called boundary crossing, moving back and forth between industry and vet. Other recruitment recommendations, including targeted incentives, which may be financial. There may be even a bond period. Some of those tried and trusted ways that have been done with teachers in the past. But industry-led programs that facilitate the entry to selected industry experts into vet by providing appropriate training and RTO placements. We talked to a number of people who are quite strong on engaging more with industry to recruit.
Importantly, there's a recommendation there to establish a national register of vet practitioners as a central entry point, which can act as a resource for practitioners seeking work and RTOs seeking practitioners. RTOs really pushed this one. They wanted to have a central point in which they can find out who's available, who's got the quals, and who they can tap directly on the shoulder.
And then for recommendations for transition, as we've been spelling out here, ensure that the requirements and expectations are clear from the outset so that they don't get a big surprise when they get there and say, oh, this isn't what we expected. And some people talked about exactly that, people moving across from industry and spitting the dummy after a while saying, well, this is what you promised. So we might be able to develop a flow chart that shows exactly how the system works, promotional materials, of course, and in regard to the Cert 4, looking at a range of options for working towards a mandatory training and teaching qualification, that was certainly a confusion for people in terms of getting into vet from industry and what they had to do and the constraints around the Cert 4.
There seems to be also a push for some sort of acknowledgement of industry experts who hold presenter skill sets as appropriate for unsupervised delivery within specified limits, possibly not in assessment roles. RTOs and vet practitioners alike were looking at more flexible ways of dealing with it. Developing a clear RPL process. We found that RPL wasn't used very much by the industry in terms of training and moving into a vet practitioner role. Providing peer support for teaching and administration during the early months appears to be vital. For example, through mentoring and co-delivery and monitor and providing feedback on initial progress.
It was in fact disappointing for us to discover to get some of the comments from vet practitioners that when they turned up on the job that nobody seemed to give them very much support. One of them talked about being given a USB and told to go to the next classroom and start teaching. and tradies in particular, who came from a background without much teaching expertise, were often struggled in those early weeks when it just seemed that some good support from within the RTO would have helped them along.
Identifying ways of providing career progression for vet practitioners where these currently don't exist is a reasonable perspective, as well as developing and sustaining industry experts and vet practitioners' commitment to collegial engagement through participation in continuing development and dual profession, and as a dual professional. I think the notion of dual professional needs to be pushed more, and that adds into developing identities as dual professional and underlines that importance of professionalism. Okay, our research was guided by particular research questions, but there was broader matters that came up through the research over and over by industry experts and by the actual RTOs as well. So there needs to be an encouragement of exploration of new models of the industry and vet engagement, purely because there's a need to rethink industry level about the way the training for each industry takes place. We found that industry not necessarily was captured in the way in which it thought about the way in which its skills and knowledges were taught and who taught them. They're very well represented through the industry reference committees, but in terms of that is the skills, but in terms of the individuals who teach and train, we felt there needed to be more focus on that.
And in fact, we found we don't want to portray this in a completely negative way. We came across some really interesting examples of industry working with vet to create training pathways for them. But nevertheless, there did seem to be a bit of a gap, a distance between the industry and vet in a number of cases. And of course, we come back to the not so much to the Cert 4, but to the notion that there's clearly a need for a fit-for-purpose educational qualification or qualifications. We're aware that there are moves to review the Cert 4 at the moment, but we're suggesting that perhaps we need to look at this a bit more broadly as well and say, well, if you really do want to bring people across from industry and you want to have some flexible arrangement for them, well, perhaps the one-size-fits-all is not going to work. And so let's look at a broader range of issues here about moving people in and out. And once again, we come back to that notion of boundary crossing, people moving back and forth between industry and vet.
The broader matter of a professional association for practitioners essentially came out from past research that's been done as well, but from these particular vet practitioners that were involved in this research, we found that over 2/3 of them supported the idea of a professional association. The extent to which vet practitioners are willing to consider themselves as professionals is intimately connected with their acknowledgement of being part of a professional association. And we believe that the extent to which they can embrace this dual identity is key to belonging to a community of practice, which is considered to be a professional association. In a nutshell. Just getting up. There it is.
And so finally, just to wrap it up, here are 6 points that we think come out explicitly from the research. Exploit career points and individual passion. Sell the benefits beyond salary. People are passionate about it. Exploit that in the best possible way. Smooth the path. Offer more options to try before you buy, and make sure that people actually know how to teach and not just how the vet system works. Look after how vet practitioners, especially after new vet practitioners, especially those that are new to training, that haven't had a training role before. and support constant boundary crossing between vet and industry. This idea that you continually engaging with industry is of course part of the updating as well, but it also links people back into their industry so that they don't feel that they've lost themselves to the industry they've been working in. And finally, promote the uniqueness of that dual practitioner. In all our research, this kept coming through, how clearly the role of a vet practitioner is a dual role and quite different from other teaching roles. And this is across the world. So we think that we could exploit that a bit more as well and promote that idea that people who are working in the field are dual practitioners and highly professional in both those fields.
Okay,
so
and back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Mark and Darryl. And yeah, we had quite a few comments and questions coming through your presentation in spite of some of those little IT glitches, so apologies for that. And particularly some questions and concerns or I guess comments that concur with your concerns about the Cert 4 TAE in its ability to really instruct industry experts to become proficient in teaching, training and assessment aspects. So we'll talk a bit more about that after Ian's had the opportunity to...
I might talk about it a little bit.
Okay, good, excellent. So I'll hand over to Ian now to give his response to your work, and then we'll, yeah, I'm particularly keen to hear, Ian, your take on some of those recommendations too. And certainly through the comments and questions coming up, there's some questions around the how do we, with your recommendations, how do we actually enact these? So I'll hand over to Ian now, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for the report and the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I want to start with a number of sort of observations that I've been thinking through in relation to the report and the presentation. I normally start looking at things from a perspective of what problem are we trying to solve, in whose interests are we solving it, and then move to where are we parking the risk. If those three things don't line up, then we're probably not on a winner in my view. But I'll start with a number of observations. I've got some discussion I want to prompt about the environment that we're in, and then I want to go to some of the specifics coming out of the report, some of the things that I think are terrific, some of the things that I thought perhaps could use a little work, and I particularly want to talk about the Cert 4 and the Vet Professional Association. And I want to finish with some ideas that I might throw into the mix about how a solution might work. So observations, we're not on our own, I don't think, in terms of skill shortages. They're not confined to vet practitioners, teachers, trainers or assessors. I think every industry is in a competition for skills. Skill shortages are emerging across the economy, and of course the more pronounced that skill shortage becomes, the more difficult it will be to attract industry experts into becoming vet practitioners. And of course it was, as the report shows, it's difficult enough to start with. The issues identified in the presentation are very real. Pay is an issue to a point. I mean, are you looking for people who are looking for their first $1 million, or are you looking for people who've had enough of that fight and are looking for those lifestyle issues? Are you looking for all of the above kind of thing? So we've got to identify what the target audience we're looking for is that will suit the environment into which we're going to put them if we're going to attract industry people. So it may not be those people who are the ambitious people that are out to make their fame and fortune. It may be people who are attracted to the notion of the passion for it, the sense of vocation around it, and this notion of giving back to industry. We've had apprenticeship arrangements around the world for 600 odd years. We haven't had national training systems for all of that time, and for most of the duration of that, it's been a person handing over skills and knowledge to another person in a work environment, and we need to think about how we build the skills of vet practitioners and what we're describing vet practitioners as. There's also the precarious nature of endemic, casual and contract employment, which is not an attractive proposition for all but the few who enjoy the flexibility of that. The role of the Cert 4 is a massive problem. That being an entry requirement, in my view, it's a lowest common denominator compliance measure. It's certainly not a vehicle for professionalising the vet teaching workforce, and I think we need to be doing something very different in that space. I'm a product of the vet system. For those who know the northern suburbs of Adelaide, I went to the Elizabeth TAFE and did a fabrication trade there a very, very long time ago, but I still think back to the things that I learned both there and in the workplace where I did my apprenticeship. That made me perhaps think about the world in a different way. It's more than just the skills and knowledge that we're trying to pass on. And I think as a union official, I think industry's getting off a bit lightly. Their contribution to this is limited. I think many or too many of them think that these are issues to be solved by government. But the key thing for me is, how do you rebuild the respect for the profession of teaching and vocational teaching particularly, and the role of vocational teaching, which is being exacerbated by heavy-handed compliance regimes, woefully inadequate funding mechanisms. It's there's a constant reform fatigue. It's compromising our confidence and the confidence in the community. And that, of course, further affects our ability to attract and retain practitioners. The environment we're in is very difficult. Skill shortages are magnified. We don't have access to the temporary skilled migrants that we've used to paper over the cracks that have been there in our training system for some time. Training systems too fragmented to fix it on their own. It's becoming less vocational and more transactional. And community, industry and student confidence is declining. Skills reform processes that are being pursued are going to add a whole new level of disruption and reform fatigue, as well, of course, dumping that in the middle of a federal and state election cycle. So it's not a great environment for positive change, but the system's still suffering from a lack of confidence brought on by some bad behaviour in the system. And I think that what is absolutely crucial is to rebuild confidence in the system. And the only way to do that is to rebuild certainty in what problem the system is out to solve. The Productivity Commission report on government services in 2020 suggested 85.1% of people engage with the vet system for employment-related reasons, but only 17.8% are employed at a higher skill level after training. It's clear the system's failing to produce the skilled workers we need to build the future that we aspire to. And my fear is that the training system, and trainers in particular, are going to get the blame for that, when it's clear that the blame should be shared pretty equally around government, industry and the training system, by rebuilding a sense of purpose of what problem we're trying to solve. This report, I think, is a really important contribution to the conversation about what it will take to rebuild the professionalism of the vet workforce. I don't disagree with much of what Mark and Darryl have presented. It resonates pretty strongly with me. There's a lot of common sense in it. Work on rebuilding respect for the profession, taking professional development very seriously. The idea that a dual professional with industry and pedagogical currency is a great one. Development of a fit for purpose education qualification and alternatives to the Cert 4, which is failing to give us the certainty we so badly want. I interpret some of the boundary crossing referenced in the presentation as industry vet exchange programs and the like, which, provided industry would support them, would be an important initiative. That circular notion of in and out of industry and not losing the connection with either industry itself or the vet profession is very important, and maintaining currency is an issue for us in the training system. I think that none of the the issues that have been raised in the main are problematic, other than a couple that go to some, I suppose, sacred cows. I've been around and sat on, I think it was a Ministerial Council for Tertiary Education and Employment action group on something. Been a few action groups and working groups, but one of those raised the issue of a vet professional association. That's one area that I would disagree. I do believe that the people who would join such an association are probably the ones that wouldn't benefit from it, as much as the ones who probably wouldn't join it would benefit from having that surrounding of professionals who could lift the minimum standard. So I'm not sure that that professional association wouldn't go the way of many others, where it would be wanting to set standards, where it would be wanting to do things and lose its capacity to interact and build a sort of collegiate view with industry of what the standard is. Much of my work as in coordinating our unions' engagement with the training system is around the fundamental standards. And we've come to the conclusion, we have a policy paper coming out soon. There was some reference in an op-ed piece in the Fin Review recently about the notion of the mistake we made when we didn't allow for the construction of a framework curriculum in Australia where we put all of our eggs, all of our regulatory eggs, all of our funding mechanisms in the basket of training packages. I'm a strong supporter of training packages, always have been. I worked on the original metals competency standards project in the late 80s, early 90s, and I continue to play a role in the metal and engineering training package, amongst others. And I think that having a strong occupational standard is important, but having a strong occupational standard for vet professionals and the level of industry currency that they need to have is also important. And I think that's an area where the report probably missed an opportunity to have a look at what problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to create a vet professional who has industry currency, who can engage with industry at a deeper level because of their proximity to industry, who have the professional skills, and I don't know how professional the skills you get will be from a certificate for in the way that we fund, regulate and deliver it. There has to be more to it. I sometimes fear that what we're doing is creating a product that is less than the sum of its parts. We are regulating the wrong part of the system. We are funding the wrong part of the system. We need to provide adequate funding to allow people not just to roll up as a tradie who's left the job and be handed a USB stick and sent into a classroom to teach in their first week. We build professionalism by giving people the room, the encouragement, the incentive to build their skills, to hone their skills, to work with others, to be more innovative. And we think that a national framework curriculum at an industry level and proper funding, because that would highlight the inadequacy of funding mechanisms and regulatory mechanisms at the moment. So we think that there are some other areas that could be looked at. Scholarships and cadetships, employment-based vet practitioner learning models would be useful. We think it's time, I don't know if it's too soon to talk about a training levy, that could help to build the professionalism of vet practitioners. But industry needs to make a bigger contribution. The NCVER is working on a survey of employer expenditure in learning and development, and we're looking very much forward to seeing the results of that. But this cannot be done on the basis of what governments will subsidise vet training for, and some mutual obligation requirements for industry might be another way of having a look at this. That could be done also through, higher level traineeships, cadetships that were employment based. And we think that there is some room for, we supported a certificate for in training and education on the basis that workplace trainers and assessors would be the primary target for it, not for it to be the entry requirement for professional training delivery. And I think it's time to revisit that as well. And I wonder, there are many displaced workers out in the community. We lost the whole car industry. There is much going on to disrupt industry. Workers get displaced from that. They're a potential target for people who can be skilled in learning and education, give them the pedagogical approach to learning that they need to transfer their skills, knowledge and passion for their vocation. And also programs to support the transition of injured workers. So, you know, there are a whole pile of things that we could be doing to build sort of communities of practice, to find innovative ways of building the professionalism, but also assisting the transition of workers who, for any number of reasons, are looking to either reduce the intensity of their day job from a labour point of view, perhaps, and move into something that gives a bit back, that creates a sense of purpose. There is a great sense of vocation amongst people who have historically learned their skills and knowledge through employment-based apprenticeships, traineeships and the like. And I think there's a nagging teacher in all of us who have done a trade apprenticeship, for instance, and we've got to tap into that across the entirety of the vet graduate space and encourage people right from their first experience with the vet sector to think about vet as a career. It's a worthwhile career. It's a career that you can see the results of your work, and would be a worthy career for many. So I think, you know, the problem that we're trying to solve is to ease that transition, to make it more attractive. Money might get you some of the way, but there are plenty of people who are looking for more than just that, and people who have a genuine desire to pass on their capability to coming generations. So I might leave it at that.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, it's that transition, but it's also trying to hold on to them as well. That's
Absolutely.
the important thing. Thank you so much for those insights, and I particularly liked the other suggestions you've made about other things to consider. So we've got some questions and some commentary, Mark and Darryl. So I'll open it up. I'll put those questions to you now. And there were a number of comments and some questions around, I guess the quality, as Ian's talked about, the quality of Cert 4, but leading on to that, so taking that concept of your fit for purpose educational qualification that you talk about. So a little bit more information. We've had a question about, the clarification about what, we really need to clarify what the intended purpose is going to be. So it's fit for purpose. What do we mean by fit for purpose, given such variation across industries and the needs there? So are you able to sort of expand on what you were seeing this educational qualification to look like?
The first thing we need to say is that the Cert 4 wasn't part of our actual research brief. It came up in discussions from RTOs and came up in the survey. So our brief to collect and comment on that at all. And that's why we put our comment with regards to the Cert 4 in broader matters. So things that were talked about was that it's a great way to understand about the vet system, great way to understand certain veterinary processes, but not such a good way to learn about the pedagogy of engagement. So, and essentially individuals were saying that, we would turn up, we would do our Cert 4, sometimes over 6 months, sometimes over a weekend, then be put in front of a classroom and expected to teach. A lot felt unprepared because of that. So again, it wasn't part of our research brief to collect evidence on that. This is why we picked it up, put it under broader matters. But if we look at past research, we can see that the Cert 4 TAE, TAA, the BSZ has always come up. It's in terms of the quality or the way in which it taught practitioners to engage and to use certain pedagogies in that process.
And I think the other thing that came through as far as a qualification is concerned is the different ways that people come into vet, the number of pathways that they're using. and really it's not flexible enough to allow for that. It doesn't allow for people to move back and forth. It doesn't allow for incremental learning, if you like. For there's as Mark said earlier, we found hardly anybody talking about RPL, which surprised us, because the other thing is that people were talking about this, that there are people in industry who are already mentoring and training within their own organisations, but then they have to start afresh on the Cert 4, and some of them are just jack up and say, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a comment that sort of runs along those lines too, about actually their specialists, you know, their skills are not really being recognised, and they're a little bit fed up with things, and they're, you know, not quite sure if they just give up on the whole, you know, where they are at the moment, because those mentoring skills and their own teaching skills are not being sort of recognised in that way. And I'm wondering, and I don't know if Ian wants to comment on this either, but with along the skills, the national skills reform work and in the quality reform area, and there's this one of the things that is going to be looked at or developed is the vet workforce quality strategy. So I'm not au fait with the details. I don't know if there's a lot of detail out there, but I don't know if, we don't know a lot about the professional qualifications of the vet workforce anyway. We don't even know a lot about the vet workforce in general. So I don't know if, and we've had numerous attempts at looking at the professionalisation and the minimum education qualification, you know, required for vet practitioners. A lot of research, as you know, has been looked at this. So I don't know if that's going to be included in this review. I don't know, Mark and Darryl, if you know anything further about that aspect of the quality reforms work that's going on at the national level, and whether or not something like this should be part of that.
Well, we would agree that something like this should be part of it. But in terms of being up to date as to where it's at, no, unfortunately, I'm not.
Okay.
Could I comment?
Yep.
I think that's perhaps an opportunity. There is a good opportunity in the skills reform process that the Commonwealth has triggered if we approach it to try and solve the problem that industry has and the vet sector has. If it's being approached to solve the problem that governments have, then it will go the way of other reforms. And that's the fear that we have. And I think we've said in a published piece, there's a risk that the reforms being contemplated by ministers will now descend into a debate about the mechanics of training and how we regulate and fund it, rather than building a shared national understanding about what purpose for the vocational education, what the purpose of the vocational education and training system is. So we would much rather approach this on the basis of saying not what is the minimum qualification for a vet practitioner. We should say what are the characteristics that we are looking to build into a person who is a vet practitioner. So what is the occupational standard? And the Commonwealth has got a process now that refers to it directly to an occupational standard. I think about that as being a training package qualification, which is setting the standard for a worker holistically, not, you know, the individual component parts, but as a whole. So I would call it a package. But governments see that as being a training standard. But they are now talking about a separate training standard, and we're reading that to be potentially a national framework curriculum. If we can get the characteristics of the worker nailed down in a different kind of occupational standard, not micromanaged sort of industry competency standards that must have this here and that there, and it's got to be this font. Unit titles can only be 110 characters and all that nonsense that goes with the micromanagement we've got now. But if we set a standard that the characteristics of a vocational education practitioner should be this is what they should be able to achieve, then you get the vet professionals to write a professional curriculum against which they can teach. Then you can apply your funding rules and your regulatory arrangements to the delivery of that curriculum, and you've got a decent standard. It's a lousy way of regulating the system to regulate the writing of competency standard. That's great for defining a worker, because that's the purpose of the vet system, producing a skilled and adaptable worker who goes on to employment in an area that they were trained for. But it's a lousy way of delivering training against competencies. So that the answer to what qualification should be fixed by the AQF. If we can agree that here's the package that looks like a vet practitioner, a professional, engaged, current with current industry knowledge, then we should train to meet that standard. And governments should subsidise to whatever extent, industry should subsidise to the rest of that extent, and solve the problem first, and let the alignment to the AQF. I sit on a handful of IRCs, and I'm sick to death of people walking into the room saying we need an AQF 1 level unit in X. And I say, how do you know until you've done the analysis? So we're defining the AQF level of something at an IRC level. I've chaired IRCs, I'm deputy chair of some, I'm member of about 5 or 6. How would I know what the AQF alignment to that qualification be? That's for professional educators to decide. And this is where we've got them.
Yeah.
I think one of our notions with emphasising the idea of the dual practitioner is to take advantage of that sort of thing that you're talking about, Ian, and so that you're emphasising the pedagogical aspect of it, if you like, as well as the industry aspect of it. So there's a much stronger balance in both, but also, of course, a more practical component in the teaching part of it as well, because that certainly comes through from the responses we've had. But it's also clear that professional development, you know, we've done an earlier research report on professional development, which NCVER has published, and you know, sometimes it's only lip service that's being paid in some areas, and so the whole both of those two parts could be strengthened considerably, and for the benefit of vet and for the practitioners themselves.
Now, very quickly, at the risk of being told off by our admin person here for going way over time, just one more question to you both, if I may, because we have had a few questions around this concept of this sort of national register of vet practitioners, and I guess it's more about a practical how-to, or how did you see this actually or actualizing? Like, what would it look like in practice? A centralized approach to regulation, like, but if that was the case, any thought about administration burden? You know, I don't know if you've had any chance to think about the practicalities of that.
Well, the actual idea didn't come from us, it came from the RTOs.
Yeah, yeah. Did they give any commentary on that?
I think the short answer is no, but they could see the advantage of it. The actual administration, the organisation of it, I mean, would have to be explored, and but the notion is quite attractive, I think, in terms of trying to have a more centralised point. We're not talking here about, Ian, about the professional association. This is a different sort of, you know, more a registration sort of body, if you like, not like teacher registration, but something that's more more in the sort of employment field that RTOs and vet practitioners could interact with. But to be honest, we haven't explored it beyond that. I mean, there's obviously a few ideas that have come up during our research that we couldn't really grapple with in an individual way. But so the short answer is no. There's no easy answer to that.
No. It's just about having a central point of connection, so that everybody goes to that particular hub and are able to start conversations about, well, here I am, I'm available, I have these skills, and then there's an RTO that say, well, we're looking for your skills, and the connection is made, and then negotiations move on from there. So that's where the notion of a central database came up.
More focused than, say, SEEK or something like that. I mean, this would be a different sort of, it'd still be an employment-based organisation, if you like, but how it would work, I think, needs some teasing out.
So, and it's only making the connection to get employment happening for those who are seeking employment, and those who want the employees, who want the vet practitioners, so to boost that process more.
Okay. Well, look, thank you. We have run quite over time, but wonderfully, the majority of people have stayed on, so they're very interested in this topic. There are some questions, so for those questions that we weren't able to get to during the session, I will email them to Mark and Darryl, and we'll work together to address them. But a big thank you to Mark and to Darryl and to Ian here at NCVER for your time today and for sharing your work. It really was appreciated. And thank you all to the audience who came along and listened and participated through asking some questions. So I really hope you enjoyed it, everyone, and certainly enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, bye for now.
Thank you, Ian, but I just want to emphasise the amount of passion for VET that came from our participants. It blew us away. It was wonderful to have that many participants talking about the industry that they know and love.
That's true. Okay. See you later.
Okay, bye.